السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل التدمير البناء للنظام العالمي القديم سيستمر بشكل أسرع مما كان يتصور الكثيرون منا بحسب المتابعين. إنه يمثل نهاية للأوهام، نهاية للمفهوم أن النظام الذي تفرضه الولايات المتحدة والقائم على القواعد يظل خياراً. وهو أمر مروع خلف نوعاً من الجلطة الدماغية بعد أن صدم الرئيس بوتين القادة الغربيين بأمره شن عملية عسكرية خاصة في أوكرانيا، والتي توصف على نطاق واسع وينظر إليها في الغرب على أنها إعلان حرب. صدمة وخشية تؤثران في المدن على نطاق واسع في جميع أنحاء أوكرانيا. الغرب في الواقع غاضب للغاية، لدرجة أن مساحة المعلومات والإعلام انقسمت حرفياً إلى قسمين، كل شيء أسود وأبيض من دون ألوان رمادية. بالنسبة إلى الغرب فقد تحدى بوتين بايدن بشكل شامل، لقد قام بشكل أحادي وغير قانوني بتغيير حدود أوروبا، وعمل كقوة مراجعة في محاولة لتغيير النظام العالمي الحالي لا حدود أوكرانيا فحسب. ولعل إنكار الغرب أن بوتين يعني ما يقوله يوحي بأن هذه الأزمة ستكون معنا على الأقل في العامين المقبلين، كما يرى ألستر كروك الدبلوماسي البريطاني السابق. إنها البداية لمرحلة مطولة ومحفوفة بالمخاطر من جهد تقوده روسيا لتغيير الهيكل الأمني الأوروبي إلى شكل جديد، وهو ما يرفضه الغرب حاليا. وفي نهاية المطاف بعد صراع مؤلم ستسعى أوروبا إلى المصالحة. ستكون أمريكا أبطأ، وسيكون الوضع الاقتصادي والسوق الأوروبية هما اللذان قد يحددان في النهاية متى. لقراءة استراتيجية عميقة لأحداث أوكرانيا من باب سعي روسيا والصين لتغيير أسس النظام العالمي الحالي في ظل التطورات الميدانية والعسكرية، في مقابل السردية الغربية المهيمنة والعقوبات والمزيد من العقوبات وتداعيات ذلك على أسواق المال والطاقة عالمياً، يطيب لنا أن نستقبل من العاصمة الإيطالية روما مؤسس ومدير منتدى النزاعات السيد ألستر كروك الدبلوماسي البريطاني السابق الذي عمل في المخابرات البريطانية وفي دبلوماسية الاتحاد الأوروبي. أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Alistair Crook, founder and director of Conflicts Forum, former senior British diplomat and advisor on Middle East issues to the EU Foreign Policy Chief. Welcome to Minadakhil from the inside, Alistair.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Pure pleasure to have you always, sir. Well, the constructive destruction, as coined by Professor Sergei Karaganov of the global order, will proceed faster than many of us had imagined. Putin's speech on February 24th portends a great fracture. It was framed around Ukraine, yet it's more about the decision by Russia and China to change forever the geopolitical balance and the security architecture of the globe. So might you tell us, sir, might you tell us, Alistair, about a shift to a new geopolitical order and the impact of all this on the whole world, especially with the most important geostrategic event of the week coming from India?
Exactly. Yes, certainly. I think, first of all, just to make it clear, this has been some time in the making. Mm-hmm. And the decision was probably made maybe a year ago by Russia and China together, that they needed to break this rules-based order because it was suffocating them. The whole of the process was encircling them, was suppressing them, was trying to push them back within their boundaries, put weapons around them. It was becoming an existential threat. The security architecture was basically everywhere and leaving them less and less room in which to live. and it also had other dimensions. It was undermining them culturally and undermining them economically and financially as well. So they made the decision to really push away from that. And they delivered a statement which was very clear, in which it said the time has come, we are going to act to change and to modify the global order, and in it to create a multilateral world, and a multilateral world that recognizes different political heritages, legacies, and one that recognizes also cultural changes, cultural differences between it, not just having one homogeneous, hegemonic Western culture as the basis for the whole politics of the world. As I once put it, you know, making the Middle East as if it was a Kansas in America. They wanted to move away from that.
Alistair, some might argue that possibly this operation, which Putin said is not about occupying Ukraine, will follow the pattern of Georgia in 2018, when Russian forces withdrew after a few days. This was the pattern too in Kazakhstan. Will this be the case in Ukraine as far as you can see? What does the optics tell you, sir?
Well, I just want to pause a second before answering your question, because I think one of the things we're seeing now is really that Ukraine is being used by the West to obscure the context. And the context of this is much broader than Ukraine. It is about changing the global order, changing the security environment in which Russia has to survive, in which China has to survive, pushing NATO right back to its lines of 97, getting it out of this region and stopping its advance into the Asian heartland. And that is the prime. And for that, Putin has devised a list of military technical measures to try and push it back and to provide space for Russia, China, and other states in it. And Ukraine just happens to be, if you like, the first peg for the first measures of a much bigger plan unfolding, a plan that doesn't stop in Ukraine, doesn't stop with even in that part of the world, but extends to China, extends to Taiwan, extends to other parts of the world. So Ukraine is just the first opening, if you like, dish on a menu of a lot of dishes still to come. We don't know what they are because Putin hasn't said, but they've been working on it for some time. But Ukraine was the most essential one, and it was existential because it's so close to the border, and clearly the West was going to use this for two reasons. Not only to put weapons and to sort of push and put a lot of pressure on Putin, but I think more than that, it was laid out as a bait. Look what happened. As soon as it started, then the embassies all left Kiev. They went from Kiev to Lvov near the Polish border. The American embassy, the CIA, many, NATO, all, and they left Kiev empty. And I think, you know, they are trying to provoke an invasion. They were provoking an occupation of it in order to do their usual exercise, which is to set up an insurgency and to turn Ukraine into a quagmire, as they did in Afghanistan, as they've done in Syria and elsewhere, that Russia will get stuck in this quagmire forever, which is why I think so clearly President Putin says, we're not going to occupy it. No, thank you very much. We're going to look out and we're going to sort out the Donbass, the Luhansk and the Donetsk republics, which he's now recognized as independent republics. But I don't think he intends to occupy or sort of be a colonial power running Ukraine at all. That would play into the American hands. In a sense, all of this, I mean, we're really provoking Putin. I mean, look at what happened in Munich. I mean, the language used in Munich.
Exactly.
I mean, was provocative.
And this was also referred to in the words of the German Chancellor Scholz when he met upon his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I mean, he looked at them at the end. I mean, he said various things that provoked Putin, like justifying the 78-day bombing of Belgrade, as if that was quite normal and justified. And then at the end, and he said, by the way, putting Ukraine into NATO is not on the agenda. So there's no need to talk about it. I mean, after all those broken promises, going back to 1997, and he thought this was okay? No, I think it was intended, probably. This was intended to push President Putin and Russia into taking action in Ukraine in order to, if you like, and then to unleash what they wanted to unleash: sanctions, information war, psyops, and uncut against Russia, all of which, of course, they've done.
Well, President Putin said it loud and clear, and he means what he says. Russia's back is to the wall, and there is nowhere to which Russia can now retreat. For them, this matter is existential. You believe that this crisis will be with us for at least the next couple of years. As a veteran, Alistair, how will things boil down?
No one knows exactly what, because we don't know what measures. This has been discussed in great detail between Russia and China. I mean,
Alistair, will Europe seek reconciliation? What about the US? And when do you speculate that might happen? And what will determine that?
Okay, so let's go. I mean, the next stage is going to come. And I mean, first of all, look at all of the things that we've had. All of the foreign exchange reserves have been stolen, taken away. People have been kicked out of SWIFT. Banks have been removed from SWIFT. Measures have been put on. And then we've had, RT and all of the Russian programs removed from the element. But what's coming next, I think, is the consequences of that, because it's unprecedented to just take 500, 650 billion of foreign reserves from a central bank, remove them from the international market, make it impossible mostly for people to buy oil or gas from Russia. Even if they say they've kept it open, no one will trade in it. Commodities are shooting up. The commodities, all of these things, of which really Russia is the super provider for the world, have suddenly gone off the scale, off the board, if you like, off the global economic board, and have been suddenly removed. And the consequences of that are going to come very soon. Inflation. We are in a war, and in a war, inflation always follows. In a war, it is always contractionary. So it'll both be contractionary and inflationary at the same time. And food prices are going to soar. Energy prices are going to soar. Will German industry be viable at these sort of levels of energy prices? Will it be possible to get electricity at competitive rates? I think Europe is going to face a really enormous destructive crisis in this period, and recession, maybe a severe recession. So my question then is, and I don't know this answer to it, but how is that going to affect the reaction of Europe and other European states, or even America, towards Russia? Because, let's be very clear, neither the Federal Reserve nor the main banks in Washington approved of taking banks off SWIFT, approved of the measures to just remove foreign exchange reserves from the central bank. They said it was dangerous and could spark a major financial crisis in the world, and they advised against it. Anyway, it seems like Europe was agog to do it and full of zeal, and they fired themselves up at Munich to go whole hog, and they've thrown everything at Russia at the moment. And now now they're all complaining. No one is able to trade. No one knows what to do about commodities. There are going to be defaults. There are going to be people who aren't going to be able to pay. Are they at that point going to come back, adults in Europe, say, listen, you've simply got to just sort of pull this together. You need to go and talk to Putin, and you need to sort this out, because otherwise we're in deep, deep economic trouble. And in deep economic trouble means that many of us here in Brussels, the heads of government, won't be here very shortly, because there will be a political backlash. There will be people who will be, people are struggling. Their energy bills have already gone up by 54% this month in Europe, where I am at the moment.
I will come. Yes, I will come, Alistair, to talk about this particular issue and the Western narrative and all those steps taken by the West and Europe towards Russia, and the counter steps actually like taken by India and Pakistan and China and other parts of the globe. But allow me to keep on talking in the financial and energy sector. The pressure now will be accentuated on Europe to find additional sanctions against Russia. Moscow has promised to reciprocate any sanctions in a way that will hurt the US and Europe. In the end, the ruble fell, but it did not collapse. It was managed by Moscow. Tell us more about the negative implications on the world order in this sense.
Listen, Russia sits on the breadbasket of the world, and certainly of Europe and the Middle East, in wheat and bread. It sits on the main energy resources of the world, gas and oil. It sits on all the precious metals and the rare earths that you need for modern technological manufacturing. It sits on all of these things. And the world, just to simply remove them off the table, take them out of the process, is incredible. And of course, Russia has every means to make this very, very painful. So far, they haven't reacted. We're still waiting for the countermeasures. Putin has said very clearly there will be countermeasures for the sanctions imposed, but he hasn't declared it. Many things they could do. Let me just give you one thing that would change everything. Supposing they've taken away all the foreign exchange, so people can't buy oil or gas with a foreign exchange from the central bank. So what happens if Russia now just turns around and say, okay, we're selling gas and we're selling oil, but only in yuan, only in the ruble, or even more frightening for the West, maybe we'll take it at, say, 50 barrels equals 1 ounce of gold. What do you say that? Would you like to buy it in gold? Maybe we'll only accept gold. I mean, these things would just change the financial structure completely, change it radically. We would be off. And of course, China sits on huge reserves of gold, so does Russia. And they have markets, and I think already they've thought about moving the ruble and loosely connecting it to a gold standard. I mean, that would change. And then, of course, I mean, we're already seeing the move, as you mentioned, with India already moving in that direction, because everyone can read the writing on the wall. Well, overnight, they flick of the switch and they turn off your central bank reserves. They take you out of the messaging system for paying banks. They take you out of your ability to raise money on the international exchanges. They then refuse to allow your own narrative, your own perspective to be heard in the West. And suddenly the West of the world says, wow, that's not a good thing to do. Maybe we ought to get out of this, make ourselves less vulnerable, and get out of the dollar system and hedge it with other currencies.
So, Alistair, you said that it's going not to stop at the threshold of Ukraine. It's going to be a holistic thing. Putin determined that there was no point in waiting any longer before implementing Russia's red line. Do you think that China would also not wait any longer before implementing its red line vis-à-vis Taiwan, retrieving it fully under its cloak again?
I think that's quite possible. I think what we have seen is that there is very close coordination. They back each other up in ways that are unseen. but nonetheless are very real. China and Russia are working very closely, coordinating all these moves. At the right moment, you may well see that the West is facing a two-front challenge and not just a one-front challenge with Russia. We may see that any time, and it's not difficult to see. Why? Because America is pushing the Taiwan issue ever closer to explosion by encouraging independence and the declaration of independence by Taiwan from China. And China's warned all along, very clearly, just as we've seen with Ukraine. China has warned that that is as explosive as trying to turn Ukraine against Russia. Turning Taiwan
against
into
China.
China is just as dangerous. It will lead to war. They've said that very clearly. So we have both these things happening.
Right.
And both of them are running, but slightly different timetables at the moment. But there's no
But
reason.
you would never know when it's going to be a flashpoint at this point. How far do you reckon that Ukraine and the JCPOA are linked, Alistair?
Ukraine and the JCPOA, well, now I think they're linked in a very unexpected way for Washington. In that, Washington, I don't think, envisaged seeing oil as it presently is at $140 a barrel. And they're terrified because, as you know, the one thing that upsets American politicians is the thought of $4 a gallon gasoline in amongst its constituencies, where, Americans go wild when at $3, $3 a gallon gasoline was considered to be outrageous. Now that's heading up towards 4. He's got to do something to bring it down, so he's desperate. And I think this has meant that he's very willing to be much more flexible in the JCPOA talks than in the past. I don't know, though, that it's going to be enough. Still, it's undoubtedly the case the Americans have made big concessions. But there's one thing that I still think is going to be very, very difficult, and that is the lifting of the terrorist designation of the IRGC. I think in Congress and they've demonized the IRGC so fully amongst congressmen and the public that to do that, I don't know if it'll really happen. And now we've got a new problem in that Mr. Putin has said, well, I need guarantees too. I want guarantees that I can trade absolutely freely with Iran, even with the sanctions that you've imposed on me, because that's what I'm going to do. And I understand China said the same thing also. Now, is that going to happen or not? But they're so desperate, they've been chasing after Venezuela. I believe Biden is going to go and see going to Saudi Arabia and see Prince Salman, whom he has somewhat obviously avoided until now. So anything to get the oil price down now seems to be going.
Absolutely.
So moving that way.
Right. Alistair Kruik, founder and director of Conflicts Forum, thank you deeply for your in-depth, piercing, geostrategic reading and analysis. Always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Most welcome. ودائما الشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.